The morning he chose the beach felt like a small act of rebellion against a life that rarely slowed down. He woke before his alarm, the sky still a pale gray, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. His son was curled beneath a superhero blanket in the next room, breathing deep, trusting the world in a way that always made him pause at the doorway a little longer than necessary. He stood there for a moment, letting the sight steady him, then moved carefully so the floor wouldn't creak. Today wasn't about running errands, packing lunches, or answering emails before sunrise. Today was about water, sand, and pretending, just for a few hours, that he wasn't always carrying the weight of everything on his shoulders. The drive to the beach was quiet. Windows down, salt already in the air, he felt something loosen inside his chest. Being a black single dad meant living with layers of responsibility most people never saw, the constant calculations, the careful choices, the pressure to be twice as steady so no one questioned your competence or your character. At work, he was reliable to the point of invisibility. At home, he was everything: chef, teacher, comfort, discipline. The beach felt like neutral ground, a place where no one knew his schedule or his struggles. He parked farther away than most, preferring the walk. The sand was cool under his shoes at first, then warmer as the sun climbed. Waves rolled in with a steady rhythm, unbothered by deadlines or office politics. He took off his shoes, let the water wash over his feet, and closed his eyes. The sound alone was enough to make him breathe deeper than he had in weeks. He walked along the shoreline, head down, hands in his pockets, letting his thoughts drift. He thought about his son's laugh, about bills that never seemed to shrink, about the way his boss's emails always arrived late at night. She was demanding but fair, distant but observant. He respected her, maybe even admired her, though he kept that thought locked away where it couldn't complicate anything. Work was work. Life was life. Mixing the two was a mistake he couldn't afford. That was why it happened so easily, so accidentally. He was stepping around a group of teenagers when he glanced up, just a reflex, and time seemed to stutter. For a split second, his brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. The woman standing near the waterline, laughing as she shook sand from a towel, was unmistakably his boss. Her posture, her voice, the familiar curve of her smile, there was no doubt. And in that same heartbeat, he realized she was in a moment of vulnerability, unaware of who stood a few steps away. He turned his head immediately, almost too fast, heart slamming against his ribs. It wasn't shock so much as disbelief, followed by a sharp, instinctive respect. He focused on the ocean, on the horizon, on anything that would reset the moment. He told himself it was nothing, that people existed outside their roles, that this was just an accidental crossing of worlds that would dissolve if he didn't give it power. But his body didn't listen. His pulse stayed quick, his thoughts scattered. It wasn't about what he had seen. It was about the reminder that everyone carried layers unseen. At work, she was authority and precision, a voice that commanded rooms. Here, she was simply human, caught between laughter and the wind, unguarded in a way he never imagined. He walked farther down the beach, putting distance between himself and the moment. He tried to laugh it off internally, to treat it like any other awkward coincidence. Yet the feeling lingered, not uncomfortable exactly, but unsettling in its honesty. It cracked something open in him, a realization that the walls he'd built between who people were, and who they appeared to be were thinner than he'd believed. He sat on the sand and watched the waves for a long time. Memories surfaced without invitation. Late nights at the office, the way she'd once noticed he looked exhausted and quietly told him to take the next morning off, the respect in her eyes when he talked about his son. He'd always assumed her distance was a choice, a shield. Now he wondered what else he'd misunderstood. The sun climbed higher, warming his skin, and slowly his breathing steadied. He reminded himself why he was there: peace, not complications. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of the water, sending it to his sister with a simple message about taking a rare day for himself. She replied with a string of encouragement, and jokes that made him smile despite everything. When he finally stood to leave, he chose a path that kept him facing the ocean, careful not to look back. It wasn't avoidance born of fear, but respect, for her, for himself, for the fragile balance he worked so hard to maintain. He knew Monday would come with its usual routines, emails, meetings. He also knew it wouldn't feel exactly the same. As he walked back to his car, he felt changed in a quiet way. Not shaken, not tempted, just more aware. The world had reminded him that people were fuller than the roles they played, that strength and vulnerability often existed side by side. He started the engine, letting the air conditioner hum, and took one last deep breath of salt and sun. He didn't know yet how that moment would ripple into the days ahead. All he knew was that something subtle had shifted, like a tide turning beneath calm water. And as he drove home to pick up his son, carrying sand in his shoes and thoughts he couldn't quite name, he understood that sometimes life doesn't change with noise or drama. Sometimes it changes in a single, silent second, when you look away, and see everything more clearly than before.